You don't lose relationships all at once. You lose them silently. It happens in the pauses you don't notice, in the text you don't send, in the moment you pull back instead of leaning in, without knowing why. Picture this. You're lying awake at night, replaying conversations that already ended. Someone you once felt close to now feels distant. A lover who felt magnetic at first slowly turned familiar, then frustrating, then unbearable. A friend you trusted now feels unsafe, draining, or strangely disappointing. And the most unsettling part? You don't feel innocent, but you don't feel guilty either. You feel confused. Why does this keep happening to you? Why do connections that begin with intensity end in disappointment? Why do you keep choosing people who awaken the same wounds, just wearing different faces? You tell yourself stories. I'm just unlucky. People change. I give too much. I attract broken people. But somewhere beneath those explanations, something quieter is at work, something older, something you didn't consciously choose. A silent saboteur. And it lives inside you, not as a villain, but as a protector that learned the wrong lesson. Pause here for a moment. What if your relationships aren't failing because you're unlovable, but because a hidden part of your mind is terrified of real intimacy? What if the patterns you hate most are not accidents, but strategies? Strategies formed long before you had the words to question them. Carl Jung once warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And nowhere is this more painfully true than in love, friendship, and trust. You think you're choosing partners. You think you're choosing friends. You think you're choosing how close to let someone get. But what if you're not? What if your subconscious is choosing for you, quietly steering you toward what feels familiar, not what is healthy, toward emotional chaos because it feels like home, toward unavailable people because availability feels dangerous, toward intensity instead of stability because calm feels empty? Why do you feel bored with people who treat you well? Why do you feel obsessed with those who pull away? Why does safety feel suffocating, but distance feels addictive? This is not coincidence. This is conditioning. And here's the uncomfortable truth most relationship advice avoids. Your brain may be sabotaging your love life without your permission. Not because it wants you to suffer, but because it wants to protect you from pain it remembers too well. Protection, when outdated, becomes poison. The Vedic sages spoke of samskaras, deep mental impressions carved by past experiences. Jung called them complexes. Modern neuroscience calls them neural pathways. Different languages, same truth. Unseen forces shaping your choices. You don't fall in love randomly. You don't bond accidentally. You don't repeat patterns by chance. You reenact. And reenactment is the mind's attempt to resolve unfinished emotional business. Here's the paradox. The very patterns you believe are destroying your relationships were once designed to save you. Let that sink in. That emotional distance you create, it once kept you safe. That attraction to chaos, it once felt like connection. That urge to withdraw, test, control, or overgive, it once meant survival. But survival is not the same as love. And the part of you that learned how to survive does not know how to relax. So it interferes. It misreads signals. It confuses intimacy with threat. And slowly, quietly, it pulls the strings. Not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough to keep love almost close and always just out of reach. In the next section, you'll begin to see where this silent saboteur was born, how psychology, philosophy, and ancient wisdom all point to the same hidden root. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it.
The silent saboteur didn't appear overnight. It was trained. It was shaped in moments you barely remember, tones of voice, emotional absences, unpredictable warmth, conditional affection. Long before you had language for boundaries or attachment, your nervous system was already taking notes. This is what love feels like. This is what safety costs. This is how close I'm allowed to get. And once those lessons were learned, they hardened into identity. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unseen architecture of the psyche, built from what was too painful, confusing, or unacceptable to fully feel at the time. The shadow isn't evil, it's adaptive. It forms when the psyche must survive without understanding. As a child, you didn't choose your emotional environment, you adapted to it. If love was inconsistent, you learned hypervigilance. If affection was conditional, you learned performance. If closeness led to hurt, you learned distance. If chaos felt normal, calm felt suspicious. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your adult relationships are often negotiations between your conscious desires and your unconscious fears. And fear almost always wins, because fear speaks the language of survival. Modern psychology names this attachment theory. Secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. Labels meant to explain patterns, but not dissolve them. Because labels don't heal what they don't confront. Your attachment style isn't just a relational preference, it's a memory system. Your brain learned early on what closeness predicts, and the brain, ruthless in its efficiency, will always choose what feels familiar over what feels healthy. This is why you can intellectually know someone is good for you and still feel nothing, and why someone emotionally unavailable can ignite obsession. Your rational mind asks, is this person right for me? Your subconscious asks, does this person feel like home? And home, for many, was never peaceful. The Vedic tradition understood this long before neuroscience caught up. It taught that the mind operates through vasanas, deep-rooted tendencies carried not only from childhood, but across lifetimes. Whether you interpret this metaphorically or spiritually, the insight remains devastatingly accurate. Unexamined impressions repeat themselves. You are not drawn to people, you are drawn to patterns, and patterns don't care about your happiness. They care about their own continuation. Pause here. If you were truly choosing freely, why would your relationships keep ending in the same emotional place? Different faces, same pain. Jung observed that what we fail to confront internally, we meet externally, again and again, until we recognize it. This is why love feels fated, why breakups feel eerily familiar, why you say, I don't know why this keeps happening. Because something in you does know, but it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in impulses, attraction, repulsion, chemistry. And chemistry, more often than not, is trauma remembering itself. Society doesn't help. You were taught to romanticize intensity, to confuse anxiety with passion, to chase butterflies instead of stability. Movies taught you that love should hurt. Culture taught you that longing equals depth. Social conditioning taught you that being chosen means worthy. So when someone offers consistency, patience, emotional presence, you feel restless. Is this it? Why don't I feel more? Why does this feel flat? But when someone withholds affection, sends mixed signals, disappears, you light up. Your nervous system recognizes the rhythm. This isn't romance, this is reenactment. And here's the cruelest trick of the silent saboteur. It convinces you that the pain is caused by them, their flaws, their coldness, their instability. But the deeper wound lives elsewhere. The real problem is not that you keep choosing the wrong people, it's that the wrong people feel right to the part of you that's still protecting old wounds. Protection masquerading as preference. This is why surface-level advice fails. Just love yourself, raise your standards, communicate better. None of that reaches the root, because the root is pre-verbal, pre-rational, pre-conscious. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the emotional reflexes that activate before thought. Until those reflexes are seen, felt, understood, you will keep mistaking survival for love, and the saboteur will keep doing its job, quietly, patiently, convincingly. In the next section, you'll see how this hidden mechanism doesn't just affect your romantic life, but quietly reshapes your friendships, your trust, and even your sense of self. And once you see the consequences, you may begin to feel the urgency to change.
The most dangerous effects of the silent saboteur are not dramatic. They're gradual, invisible, normalized. You don't wake up one day and realize your relationships are broken. You adapt to the fracture. You call it independence. You call it maturity. You call it being low maintenance. But something essential is quietly eroding. Trust becomes selective. Closeness becomes conditional. Vulnerability becomes calculated. And slowly, without announcing itself, your emotional world begins to shrink. Look closely. You stop sharing certain thoughts because they were once misunderstood. You stop asking for help because it once led to disappointment. You stop expressing needs because they once felt like a burden. Better to stay contained. Better to stay composed. Better to stay slightly alone than deeply hurt. This is how the saboteur wins, not by destroying relationships outright, but by teaching you to expect less from them. Neuroscience reveals something chilling here. Your brain is a prediction machine. It constantly scans for patterns, updating its expectations based on past outcomes. When intimacy once led to pain, your nervous system doesn't wait for proof, it anticipates threat. So even in healthy relationships, your body reacts as if something is wrong. A delayed reply triggers anxiety. Emotional closeness triggers withdrawal. Conflict triggers shutdown or attack. Not because the situation is dangerous, but because your memory says it might be. This is confirmation bias in emotional form. You notice evidence that supports your fear and ignore what contradicts it. You read neutral actions as rejection. You interpret silence as abandonment. You mistake calm for boredom. And then, here's the twist, you behave in ways that provoke the very outcome you fear. You pull away. You test. You withhold. You overgive until resentment builds. The relationship strains. And when it finally breaks, the saboteur whispers, "See, I told you, people can't be trusted." Pause. Do you see the loop? The mind predicts pain, behaves defensively, and then uses the result as proof it was right. This is not fate. This is conditioning running unchecked. Friendships suffer too. You keep people at a safe emotional distance. You're present but not fully, helpful but guarded, loyal but rarely open. So connections remain functional, not nourishing. And over time, loneliness creeps in, not because you lack people, but because you lack contact, real contact. Jung warned that when the shadow remains unconscious, it doesn't disappear, it acts out. It leaks into behavior, tone, choices. It shapes the atmosphere around you. Others feel it. They sense your hesitation, your emotional breaks, your guarded warmth. Not consciously, but intuitively. So they respond in kind. Less depth, less risk, less reach. And the world begins to mirror your inner withdrawal. Culture reinforces this beautifully. You're praised for being self-sufficient, for not needing anyone, for staying unbothered. But beneath that polish is something ancient and aching. The Vedic texts describe avidya, ignorance not as lack of information, but as misidentification, mistaking defense for identity, mistaking survival for self. When you identify with the saboteur, you begin to believe, this is just who I am. I'm not built for deep connection. People always disappoint. These beliefs harden, and beliefs shape perception. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes destiny. This is how a psychological pattern becomes a life story. And perhaps the most devastating consequence of all,
You begin to abandon yourself. You ignore your longing for closeness. You dismiss your desire for intimacy as weakness. You numb the ache instead of listening to it. But longing doesn't disappear when ignored. It goes underground. It emerges as restlessness, as dissatisfaction, as the sense that something essential is missing, even when life looks fine from the outside. Here's the paradox. The saboteur believes it's protecting you from pain, but in doing so, it deprives you of love. And love, unlike safety, cannot be rationed. In the next section, everything turns. Because once you see the loop clearly, a radical possibility emerges, not by fighting the saboteur, but by understanding it. And that understanding changes everything.
Here is where most people try to fix themselves. They wage war against their patterns. They shame their fears. They try to outthink their emotions. And the saboteur grows stronger. Because what you resist internally does not dissolve. It hardens. Carl Jung said something radical, almost dangerous to the self-improvement mindset. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. The shift is not about control. It's about relationship. The silent saboteur is not your enemy. It is a frightened guardian stuck in the past. Pause here. What if the part of you that sabotages closeness is not broken, but loyal? Loyal to a younger version of you that once learned closeness hurts. Dependence is dangerous. Love must be earned or survived. That part stepped in when no one else did. So the radical shift is this. You stop trying to get rid of the saboteur and start listening to it. Not indulging it, not obeying it, but witnessing it. In Jungian psychology, this is called integration. In Vedic wisdom, it is Sakshi Bhava, the stance of the witness. You step back from identification. Instead of saying, "This is who I am," you begin to say, "This is something happening within me." That single shift changes everything. Because now, when anxiety arises in closeness, you don't panic. You notice. Ah, here you are. Old fear, old memory. When boredom appears in stability, you don't immediately run. You inquire, is this boredom or is it unfamiliar peace? When you feel magnetized toward emotional unavailability, you pause. You feel the pull without acting on it. This is not suppression. This is awareness interrupting automation. Neuroscience confirms this. The moment you name an emotional pattern, the prefrontal cortex activates. The amygdala, the alarm system, loses dominance. Choice re-enters the picture. You move from reaction to response, from compulsion to curiosity. Here's the micro-thought. Listen carefully. You don't heal patterns by choosing differently. You heal patterns by noticing why you choose. This is where real agency begins. Think of a time you felt triggered in a relationship. The urge to withdraw, the impulse to test, the desire to control or disappear. Instead of acting, imagine staying present, feeling the sensation in the body, the tightness, the heat, the urge, and saying internally, "This is old. This belongs to the past. I am safe now." At first, it feels unbearable because the saboteur equates stillness with danger. But slowly, very slowly, the nervous system learns a new association. Closeness does not always lead to pain. Staying does not mean losing myself. I can feel fear without obeying it. The Buddha called this the middle path. Not indulgence, not avoidance, but conscious presence. You stop reenacting the past. You stop trying to escape it. You metabolize it. And something strange happens. What once felt magnetic begins to feel empty. What once felt boring begins to feel nourishing. What once felt terrifying begins to feel intimate. Not overnight, not cleanly, but truthfully. The saboteur doesn't vanish. It softens, because it finally feels seen. In the final section, we arrive at the deepest truth, the realization that dissolves the struggle altogether, not by promising perfect relationships, but by revealing what relationships were always meant to awaken in you.
Here is the truth few are ready to hear. Your relationships are not meant to make you happy. They are meant to make you conscious. This is the final illusion that breaks. Love is not a reward for healing. Connection is not a prize for being fixed. Relationships are mirrors, merciless and precise. They show you where you are still asleep. Jung believed that love pulls unconscious material to the surface faster than any other force. That is why it feels intoxicating at first and destabilizing later, because intimacy threatens the ego's defenses, and the ego mistakes threat for danger. But danger is not always harmful. Sometimes it is initiatory. The Vedic tradition speaks of relationships as karmic classrooms. You are not randomly paired. You are matched with exactly the lessons you are ready to confront. Not the partner you want, the partner that reveals. The silent saboteur was never trying to ruin love. It was trying to keep you unconscious, because consciousness requires loss. Loss of familiar pain, loss of old identity, loss of the story that says, this is just how I am. Here is the most powerful realization of all. You are not broken because you struggle with intimacy. You are awakening through it. The pain you feel is not proof of failure. It is friction between who you were and who you are becoming. When you stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to show me? Everything shifts. You no longer seek relationships to complete you. You seek them to reveal you. You stop demanding safety. You cultivate presence. You stop running from discomfort. You let it teach you. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something dissolves. The urgency, the desperation, the compulsive pull. Love becomes less dramatic, but more real, less intoxicating, but more alive. You learn to stay with yourself, with another, with the unknown. This is the death of the saboteur, not through force, but through understanding. Because once consciousness enters the room, sabotage loses its cover. And the final question lingers, not as a command, but as an invitation. What would change in your relationships if you stopped trying to protect yourself and started trying to know yourself? Sit with that. Let it echo, because awareness, once awakened, does not go back to sleep.